Hello and welcome to this talk by me, Eugne Sadler Smith, Professor of Organisational Behaviour at the University of Surrey, UK. And the talk looks at the relationship between artificial intelligence and human intuition, and it asks the question, will artificial intelligence kill human intuition? One of the assumptions, I guess, in the question is that intuition is useful. But is intuition useful? Well, what do business leaders have to say about that? Perhaps one of the most famous quotes about intuition is from Steve Jobs to graduates at Stanford University in 2006, where he said that they should have the courage to follow their heart and their intuition because they somehow already know what they want to become and everything else is secondary. Dawn Ostroff, executive at Spotify and Condé Nast, said that we should listen to our inner voice and trust it. Bill Gates, who we might not expect to be especially intuitive, actually does trust his intuition. When he was asked by CNN whether or not he trusts his intuition, he said that if he thinks something's going to catch on, then he trusts his own intuition. He knows that it can sometimes be wrong, but his batting average is good enough that he keeps on swinging. Angela Ahrendts, who was chief exec of the British fashion house Burberry, said that intuition is a form of wisdom, the gift of knowing without reasoning, and related to the idea of not overthinking things. And then finally, of course, no discussion of intuition would be complete without a quote by Albert Einstein, and Einstein is reputed to have said that I believe in intuitions and inspirations because I sometimes feel that I am right, but I do not know that I am. So clearly, important business people and scientific geniuses use their intuition. What about managers in general, though? So the Economist Intelligence Unit, working with PwC, asked 1,300 senior leaders, about 400 of whom were C-level, which of the following inputs did you place the most reliance on in your last big decision? Intuition and experience, data and analytics, advice from others, financial indicators, or others? And here are the results from this survey. 30% trusted intuition and experience for their most recent big decision, 29 data and analytics, 28 advice from others, and then 9% financial indicators and 4% others. So there's a roughly three-way split between intuition and experience, data and analytics, and advice from others. So we can say that as far as senior leaders are concerned and big decisions, intuition does have a big role to play. And indeed, it has as important a role to play as does analysis and data, which is interesting. One of the conclusions that the Economist Intelligence Unit drew from this research was that the challenge for business is how to marry gut instinct with data and analytics. And we might say now the challenge is how to marry together intuition and artificial intelligence, which is the subject of this talk, really. I guess before we move any further, we maybe need to ask ourselves the question, what is intuition? And who better to ask than managers themselves? So one way in which I've done this in the past is by asking managers what happens when you intuit. The technique is called denominalization, where you take the noun intuition and you turn it into the verb intuit, and then you ask managers to tell you what happens when they intuit, and they do so by completing the statement, when I intuit ... When I asked, it was 127 human resource managers who I asked this question of. The results were published in a journal, Human Relations, in 2016. But in terms of what I found, maybe present it as a word cloud is a nice, quick and easy and convenient way to see the results. So the things that came up most frequently are the big ones in blue and so on through the different colours. So what happens when you intuit, when managers intuit? Well, it's a decision about something feeling right. So from the words that the managers themselves used, we can actually construct a definition from bottom up, if you like, not driven by theory, about what managers think happens when they intuit. So if we take these results and translate it into a simple definition, My human resource managers in the sample think that intuition is a decision that's based on a feeling that something is right or not right. Of course, it can tell us to approach a situation, which is when something feels right. It can also tell us when to avoid a situation, when something is not right. So there's a bottom-up definition, if you like, from managers themselves. Of course, we need textbook definitions and we need theory as well. Here are 3 textbook definitions. The first one was one that I published in 2004 in a journal called Academy of Management Perspectives, and I defined it then as knowing without knowing how or why you know, which is a very basic definition. It's not especially helpful. A much more helpful definition, I think, is that from Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize winner, one of the founding figures of artificial intelligence, actually. And Herbert Simon said this is his definition too. Intuitions are prior analyses frozen into habit and the capacity for rapid response through recognition. So essentially, Simon is saying intuition is pattern recognition. And then perhaps the best definition of all, I think, is this one by Dane and Pratt from 2007. And they described intuitions as effectively charged judgment. What does that mean? Well, it means intuition is a judgment. Affectively charged, in other words, it involves feelings, gut feelings, we typically call it, or hunch, or vibe. Words like that are used to describe it. So intuitions are effectively charged judgments. They're a judgment. We don't know if they'll be right or wrong before the event, obviously. They arise automatically. They arise quickly. They're non-conscious and they're based on holistic associations. And that takes us back to definition 2, because by holistic associations, Dane and Pratt in this definition are referring to patterns, and pattern recognition and pattern matching, which are one of the bases of intuition, because intuition, as we know, is based on learning and experience and results in expertise. So there are some definitions of intuition. I guess we need to then think about how does it work from a theoretical point of view. Have we got a theoretical framework that we can use to understand what intuition is, how it works, and how it relates to other aspects of thinking and problem solving and deciding? The model that's used most frequently to frame how intuition works is something I've called it here the 2 minds model. So we've all got one brain, but we've got 2 minds in one brain. A 2 minds model, psychologists might call it dual process theory. Essentially system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the intuitive mind, system 2 is the analytical mind. What are they like? Well, the analytical mind, metaphorically speaking, remember these are metaphors for different types of thinking. There is no literally an analytical mind and an intuitive mind lurking inside our heads. They're metaphors. So metaphorically, the analytical mind is a narrow bandwidth processor. It involves controlled processing. In other words, it's effortful. We have to think hard to do analytical processing. It works in a step-by-step way, step-by-step analysis. It's conscious. It's in working memory. It's the things that we're aware of when we're thinking in our thinking processes. It talks to us. And it talks to us in the language of words in a speech. It's a verbal system. It's recent in evolutionary terms. Some people call it new mind. Jonathan Evans calls it new mind. And it evolved, I summarize it by saying it evolved for solving. And of course it's called system 2 in dual process terms. And then you can see where this is leading. So the intuitive mind kind of maps across in parallel, contrasting with it. So if the analytical mind is a narrow bandwidth processor, metaphorically speaking, the intuitive mind is a broad bandwidth processor. It's automatic, it's not effortful, we don't have to think hard for intuitions to happen. They simply happen automatically and quickly. It works by whole pattern recognition. That takes us back to the definitions on the previous slide from Herbert Simon and Dane and Pratt. They talk about holistic associations, looking at the patterns and recognizing patterns. It's unconscious. Its workings are behind the screen, if you like, of conscious awareness. We don't know where they come from, but they emerge into consciousness. They emerge into consciousness in a particular language. And because the intuitive mind can't speak in the language of words, it talks to us in the language of feelings, gut feelings, hunches, vibes. Every language has its own word for for those kinds of phenomena. Gut feeling is a typical phrase that's used in English. It's ancient, old mind, so it goes back many hundreds of thousands of years in human history, and I think it evolved for sensing. So the analytical mind evolved for solving, the intuitive mind evolved for sensing, and in that respect, I think that they complement each other, and I think they evolved to complement each other. Way in which they do complement each other, a simple way of looking at the way, understanding the way in which they complement each other, is through this kind of traffic light diagram that I call it here. And it illustrates that the two minds, the two systems, system one, system two, analytical mind, intuitive mind, work better together. So the most simple situation is where your analysis says yes and your intuition says yes. That's a green light for a go. The opposite of that, of course, is if your analysis says no and your intuition says no, that's a red light, that's stop, don't go there. The interesting places to be are when analysis says no and intuition says yes, so in that case you need to check out your intuition, or alternatively where analysis says yes, the data says yes, go for it, go for this decision, buy this house, invest in this startup, whatever the decision might be. Your intuition says no. In that case, a wise thing to do would be to check out your analysis. So that traffic light matrix 2 by 2 illustrates the way in which the two systems work together to complement each other. Of course, they sometimes conflict, and that's there's a whole body of work on heuristics and biases, but I'm not going to talk about that in this talk. There's plenty being said about that elsewhere. So to summarize, two minds in one brain, dual process theory. The intuitive mind senses like a radar, the analytical mind solves. And I think they evolved to have different but complementary functions. Okay, so that's enough said about intuition. But this talk is about intuition and artificial intelligence. So what I want to do is switch to artificial intelligence shortly. But before I do that, before we move on to talk about artificial intelligence, I just want to explore this idea about sensing a little bit more. Because I've said the intuitive mind, system one, senses. How does it sense? What does it sense? But I think there are 4 types of sensings going on, or if you like, there are 4 types of intuition. One I've called the expert sense or expert intuition. Second one I've called the social sense or social intuition, moral intuition, and creative intuition. And what I want to do before we go on to talk about AI and its relationship to sensing and human intuition, just say a few words about these 4 different types of intuition. So the expert sense, a few words about that. In fact, what I did, talking about artificial intelligence, I asked ChatGPT to give me an example of the expert sense. I asked ChatGPT to give me an example of expert intuition. And this is what it came up with. It said, well, an example of that would be when experienced stock traders rely on their expertise, on their expert intuition to make split-second decisions about buying or selling. And they're able to do that because they've spent years studying market trends, analysing reports, understanding different sectors of business. And they quickly assess the situation and make a trading decision based on their gut feelings. It's quite a good answer actually from ChatGPT, and there's a body of work that supports what it's actually saying there. So I think we can trust ChatGPT in that instance, and it's a nice example of expert intuition or the expert sense. The second type of intuition is the social sense, social intuition. What does ChatGPT have to say about that? Again, it's not a bad answer. In fact, I wouldn't have included what it said if it gave a bad answer, because that's not the point of the talk. An example of the social sense would be in sales or in customer relations, where social intuition, the ability to relate to a client or a customer, is really important in order to build rapport, build a relationship, helping clients to understand the product or the service, and then to tailor the sales pitch to their particular needs. So that's a nice example, I think, of social intuition and judging other people's motives and intentions on the part of the salesperson and on the part of the client or the customer as well. So that's social intuition or the social sense. The third type, moral intuition or the moral sense. What might an example of that be? as suggested by, remember, this is ChatGPT that's offered these examples. Again, it's not a bad example that ChatGPT gives us. For example, a manager discovers that one of their suppliers is in a developing country is involved in unethical labour practices, child labour, unsafe working conditions. There's no analysis necessary. It's an intuitive response. It's moral intuition at work. It's instinctive almost. The manager's intuitive reaction is immediate disgust, because moral intuitions are accompanied by moral emotions, in this case disgust at the fact that child labour and unsafe working conditions are being used, and leads to the termination of the contract. So the idea here of moral intuition is that it's instinctive. It's not necessary to reason it through, because intuition enables the decision maker to access their moral compass instantaneously. There's a whole body of work around this from Jonathan Haidt and others around the moral sense. And then finally, the creative sense or creative intuition. What's that all about? What do we mean by the creative sense? So creative intuition or creative sense, it goes beyond conventional design process. It's about, the light bulb moments, thinking outside the box, etc., to produce innovative solutions. But the other part of the creative sense, I think, is this. It's about producing creative ideas and thinking outside of the box, but it's also the ability to evaluate the ideas, to sense what will or won't work. And that's based very much on experience and being immersed in the market and immersed in your particular field and having expertise as well. But what creative intuition or the creative sense enables somebody to do is to produce products or services that stand out in the market, that capture attention, and ultimately that can drive business success. So those are the 4 types of intuition involved in this kind of sensing capability that System 1 has, that the intuitive mind has. So with that in mind, those 4 types of intuition in mind, what I now want to do is to flip slightly to artificial intelligence and just talk about a very recent piece of work by Fabrizio Dell'Acqua from Harvard, conducted in collaboration with BCG Boston Consulting Group this year, published as a working paper by Harvard Business School. I'll give you the reference in a minute. But basically, they were asking the question, when does artificial intelligence outperform human intelligence? So it's not specifically about intuition. It will be, because we'll relate it to intuition surely. But when does AI outperform HI? When does artificial intelligence outperform human intelligence? Really interesting study. I'll try and talk you through it. Before I do that, though, ChatGPT, which is the AI that they used in the study, in the experiment, is just the latest incarnation of cognitive augmentation, as we might call it. The various milestones in augmenting human intelligence, going way, way back to, 4,500 years ago, when the abacus was invented by the Babylonians to help our analytical mind do calculations. 1632, the slide rule was invented. 1950s, the first thinking machines. There's Herbert Simon with one of the first thinking machines developed in the 1950s. 1960s, the electronic calculator, and then of course 2020, the most high-profile manifestation of artificial intelligence is ChatGPT. ChatGPT, in the news every day, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's a large language model-based chatbot developed by OpenAI, launched in November 2022, and has not been out of the headlines since. So the research, the Dell'Acqua et al. Research with Boston Consulting Group and Harvard, what they did in this study was they pitted human beings against human beings augmented by ChatGPT. So it's humans versus humans plus AI. The AI is ChatGPT in this case. And the task that the humans and the AI were working on were professional services tasks, consulting tasks. The sample size is big, 758. Boston Consulting Group employees, and the AI that was used, as I've said, is ChatGPT. In the experiment, they had 3 groups. They had a control group, that was a group of employees professional service employees who didn't have any AI, just used human intelligence. Second group was humans plus AI, and that group, the second group, were engaged in what's called a creative product innovation task. There's the creative product innovation task, or an example of one that was used. So generate ideas for a new drink in an underserved market, pick the best, describe steps in prototyping and launching, and suggest a name and slogan. That was a creative product innovation task. And the creative product innovation task was this task given to the second group. The third group, humans plus ChatGPT, in a business problem solving task. Did they beat the control group? And the business problem solving task was pick a brand for the company to focus on, be creative, use your judgment on what's likely to work, and justify with evidence business problem solving task. So remember, it's human plus AI in a creative product innovation task versus a control group doing the same task, or humans plus ChatGPT in a business problem solving task versus the control group who don't have access to ChatGPT. So what happened? What were the results? Well, here we go. On the creative product innovation task, don't worry about the inside frontier, I'll explain that in a minute. On the creative product innovation task, the humans plus ChatGPT outperformed the control group by 40%. So humans plus AI were better than the control group on the creative product innovation task. However, on the business problem solving task, humans plus AI were 23% worse than the control group. So in other words, on the green task, creative product innovation tasks, humans plus AI outperformed humans alone. On the red task, business problem solving tasks, humans plus AI were outperformed by humans alone. The way in which the researchers conceptualize this is very interesting. Let me take a moment or two to explain it. The dashed line represents equal difficulty tasks. They've drawn it as a curve. In the paper they explain why. I won't go into it now. It could equally have been drawn as a straight line, but it's drawn as a curve. So think of the curve as the level of difficulty of the task. And then the blue line, the blue wavy line, is artificial intelligence's abilities, AI ability. So where AI goes outside the dotted line, and the task is on that line, the task is inside the frontier. In other words, it's a task that can be completed successfully using generative AI plus humans. On the other hand, when the task is outside the blue line, outside AI's abilities, for example, the business problem solving task, they describe it as being outside of the frontier. So creative product task is inside the frontier, it's within AI's abilities. The problem solving task, on the other hand, is outside of AI's abilities. Of course, because the line's a wavy line, it crosses over the difficulty task line, and there are some tasks that exist on the frontier. So they call this line a jagged technological frontier. And it's dynamic, of course. It's going to change as the capabilities of AI change as well. More about that in a minute or two. So the summary that the two takeaways from this research was that on tasks within the frontier, the AI significantly improved human performance. Whereas outside of the frontier, the humans relied too much on AI and they were more likely to make mistakes. Okay, so let's try to put together this idea of the jagged technological frontier and human intuition, because remember the title of the talk was, Will AI Kill Human Intuition? So what I've tried to do here is to make some best guesses about where the different types of intuition, the four sensings, fit in relation to the jagged frontier. I think the expert sense, and there's been a lot written about this from the 1950s onwards, that sometimes algorithms can actually outperform human beings. So perhaps the expert sense is the one that's most likely to be inside the frontier. And this is a point for debate and discussion, but you know, as a point of debate, maybe we can say that the expert sense is the one that's most likely to be inside the jagged frontier. The social sense and the moral sense I've placed outside of the frontier. They are outside of artificial intelligence's capabilities. And then, of course, there are likely to be some tasks which are on the frontier. So for the sake of argument and for the sake of discussion, I've put the creative sense on the frontier, where humans, it's within AI's capabilities, but AI serves to augment human creativity and judgment. So say a few words about, what I want to say is a few words about AI and the creative sense, or AI and creativity and creative intuition, a little bit more to illustrate some of the points and the limitations of generative artificial intelligence. A study by Gattis et al. In 2015, what they did was they used a piece of AI that was capable of imitating famous artists. They presented it with this canal scene, and then the AI was programmed to produce pictures of the canal scene in the style of, first of all, top right, Turner, the British artist from the 1800s. So there's the AI's interpretation of the canal scene in the style of the British artist Turner. C, it's the canal scene in the style of course, Vincent van Gogh. So there's AI's interpretation of the photograph in the style of Van Gogh. And then the bottom right there, Edvard Munch's The Scream. The AI has produced the canal scene in the style of Edvard Munch. I don't know what you think, but obviously the originals, the Turner, the Van Gogh and the Munch, would find their place on the wall of any art gallery anywhere in the world. I'm not sure that AI's inventions or artistic efforts would. In fact, what the AI is simply mimicking the style, and that then raises important questions about what we mean by creativity. Is mimicking a creative work creativity in itself? If creativity is producing something novel and useful, is AI capable of being creative in that sense? Give you another example. These are all works of art by the same painter, as you probably know, Pablo Picasso, all by him at different stages in his career. And what Picasso did throughout his career was he followed the rules early on. He broke the rules with the invention of Cubism with Braque in the early part of the 20th century. And then, having followed the rules and broken the rules, he invented a new set of rules. The rules of how to represent objects, 3D objects in two-dimensional space, you know, principally Cubism. So in that sense, I don't think anybody could deny that Picasso's work is creative. Picasso was able to follow rules, to break rules, and invent new rules. And that brings me to a quote by another artist, a musician, that summarizes this quite well, I think, and helps us to understand what we mean by creativity and artificial intelligence. The French composer Claude Debussy famously said, he wrote works like La Mer, famous as an impressionist composer. He said that works of art create rules. Rules do not create works of art. So in the case of Picasso, Picasso created a new set of rules. The rules didn't create the work of art. The artist, the human creativity, created the rules. So that then begs the question, can a machine following rules created by a creative human, be truly creative? It's a big discussion, and we'll leave it there, but it really does raise questions about, you know, perhaps the answer to the question, will AI kill human creativity? Perhaps it never will, because it can't create the rules in the same way that human beings do. Remember the blue line, the AI ability line, will change position. What will happen when it goes outside the level of difficulty line is that singularity. Is that where there's runaway artificial intelligence, which is self-perpetuating, self-creating, and imperils humanity. Don't know. Big discussions about that recently in the UK at the AI Summit meeting, where hosted by Prime Minister Sunak and attended by, amongst others, Elon Musk. Big debates. So, moving on then. So AI has got a lot to offer, clearly, but the human mind also has got a lot to offer in terms of its two modes of processing. Its analytical mode of processing, the analytical mind, system 2, and its intuitive mode of processing, the intuitive mind, system 1. Maybe one way we can get the best of all worlds is to ask ourselves the question. I'm not going to answer the questions, I'm going to ask them in this talk. There's human analytical intelligence, system 2. So we can ask ourselves, what is system 2 good at? There's a typographical error on this slide, by the way. It should say on the top one, what is system 2 good at, not system 1. What is system 2 good at? What is human analytical intelligence good at? Similarly, with intuitive intelligence, and the same typographical error is there. What is system 1 good at? What is system 1 good at? What is intuition good at? What can it do well? And then we can ask ourselves, what is artificial intelligence good at? What are algorithms good at? I think the interesting places on this diagram are the overlaps between AI and analytical intelligence, and AI and intuitive intelligence, and also the overlap between intuitive intelligence and analytical intelligence. And then the really interesting place to be is where all three overlap. So what's going on in the middle there, where analytical intelligence, intuitive intelligence, and artificial intelligence all come together. You know, we can think of examples of where all three things come together. One would be medical diagnosis and treatment, where the doctor's got to have intuition, it's got to have analytical intelligence, but can be supported by AI in the form of, genome data, MRI scans, CAT scans, etc., which can be better at spotting things sometimes than human beings can. I've called this an augmented intelligence model. It's in fact a paper that was presented at the Academy of Management this year, 2023, by Cheda Paidas-Turan and myself. We call it an augmented intelligence model, and it's a model of conjoined agency. It's the conjoining of the agency of humans and machines. So finally, I've talked about intuitive intelligence. What can we say about intuitive intelligence? We can say it isn't inborn and it's not a sixth sense. And we can move on quickly from that. I think we can accept that. But what we can also accept, which is a more productive line of inquiry, is that intuition is developable. It can be developed through training and coaching. And if we can develop intuition through training and coaching, which I've attempted to do in my classes on my exec MBA course and other things with managers and execs, I think intuition or intuitive intelligence adds value by it speeds up your decision making. That's the expert intuition. It helps build better relationships in the workplace with clients and employees, customers. That's the social intuition. It helps managers to access their ethical compass. That's the moral intuition. And it helps managers to think outside the box, and that's the creative intuition. And all of those things together are the components of intuitive intelligence, which drives personal and business success. So finally, I'm going to go back to ChatGPT actually. And remember that the question at the beginning of the talk was, will AI kill human intuition? So I asked that question to ChatGPT. I said, I didn't use the word kill. I said, do you think that artificial intelligence will make human intuition redundant? So what's ChatGPT itself got to say about that? Well, actually, it's not a bad answer. It says AI has the potential to complement and enhance human intuition in many ways, but it's unlikely to make human intuition completely redundant. This is verbatim, I'm just quoting ChatGPT. Human intuition, says ChatGPT, is a complex and multifaceted aspect of human cognition that involves a combination of experience, knowledge, emotions, and pattern recognition. While AI can excel in specific tasks that involve data analysis, pattern recognition, and large-scale information processing, it lacks the depth of understanding and nuanced judgment that human intuition provides. And ultimately, the relationship between AI and human intuition is more about collaboration than replacement. Humans can leverage AI as a tool to enhance their decision making and intuition, but the uniqueness of human intuition is likely to remain relevant in many aspects of our lives. So ChatGPT and myself are kind of on the same page with this idea of augmented intelligence. So it's essential to develop this augmented intelligence idea. It's essential for humans to understand the strengths and limitations of AI, and also the strengths and limitations of their own analytical mind and intuitive mind, and use AI and the two human minds to support and augment their own intuition and judgment. So ChatGPT doesn't think that AI will kill human intuition, and its suggestions there are that they'll complement each other. So if you want to read more about this, the Delacroix et al. Work is published as a working paper by Harvard. Click on the link, follow the link there, that would take you to Boston Consulting Group's page on the same project. The Gattis et al. Study of the paintings and creative intuition, and this kind of homogenization, lack of creativity of AI is there. Obviously, if you want to read about System 1 and System 2, the best place to go is to Danny Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. And if you want to read more about intuition in business and my thoughts on intuition as these four senses of expert sense, moral sense, social sense, and creative sense, you could look at my new book, Intuition in Business, published by Oxford University Press earlier this year. So that's it. They're my thoughts on will AI kill human intuition? If you want to get in touch with me, email me e.sadler-smith@surrey.ac.uk. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much.